Um, right, welcome to episode 3, our final episode on the grooming gangs. And the question tonight is, what should the government do and what should the church do about these grooming gangs that have been going on, as to be discussed, for 50, 60 years and more, and that are widespread and that are Islamic more than they are ethnic of any kind, and that have been abusing so many girls in so many towns, in so many places around the country. What should be done about it? What changes can be done to stop this from happening and put an end to it? Thoughts? Who wants to go first?
Let me go first. Let me just actually quote what Mark Dury does, because he gives 11 recommendations.
Yeah.
I'm going to do them real quickly. I'm not going to expand on them, but just let's use this as a basis for them which we can expand ourselves.
Yeah.
His first recommendation is that we should be allowed to be frank and honest in the investigation.
Yep.
Number 2, that the religious identities of the perpetrators and victims should be rigorously recorded and made public.
Yep.
Number 3, that police should be trained to interview grooming gang suspects concerning both their religious beliefs and their practices for the victims themselves. Number 4, that police need to be trained to explore and thoroughly document religious aspects in the testimony of the victims. Listen to the victims. Listen to these quotes that you gave in the last 2 episodes. Horrendous quotes. Number 5, that the state should enforce a legal prohibition of unregistered marriages and a ban on polygamy. I mean, I thought that was already in the books. They need to actually enforce it. Number 6, that the role of the abuser's family members in enabling abuse should be considered. Look and see, why is it that these perpetrators are not just lone wolves? Number 7, that Islamic religious leaders should be called upon to issue statements that Muslim men who have sex with unmarried girls are guilty of zina, which Sonia has been talking about, and incur the wrath of God, which has not been done till now. Number 8, politicians should cease making ignorant claims about what Islam does or does not teach when they have no idea what they're talking about. Number 9, there needs to be a public acknowledgement of Islam's contributions to the grooming gangs crisis, and this needs to be made clear that there are Muslims who reject key elements of the grooming gangs' religious culture. Number 10, the UK Forced Marriage Unit should remove statements on its website claiming that there is no religious basis to marriage trafficking. And then finally, number 11, there needs to be awareness training could be provided for white working class communities and other communities who are targeted by grooming gangs to help girls and their families to recognize the signs so that they will not fall into this trap in the future. Now, those are 11 good ones. I'm sure that we can probably think of some other one, but I love what Mark has done. He's been very thorough in his recommendations.
Good recommendations. I don't hold out a lot of hope that they'll be implemented in the current government or with the current state of culture, I'm afraid. It's quite bold recommendations, really, to recognize the Islamic nature of it. We're a long way from that at the moment, if you think about it, when, like I said, Sammy Woodhouse, even just this last month, was told, don't mention the religion of it, and so on. So, this is what we need to do, but, how much worse, or how many more girls need to be sacrificed before we get to doing things like that? I'm going to compliment what you said, Jay, by reading the recommendations, some of the recommendations from the rape gang inquiry that Rupert Lowe instigated, crowdfunded. He has some slightly different ones, or additional ones, let's say. Revising the sentencing guidelines for group-based sex exploitation, deporting foreign nationals convicted of group-based child sexual exploitation. Now that is starting to happen, that one, because that is in the news at the moment. A Rotherham grooming gang leader has been released from prison, and there's an issue with trying to deport him, and the government, I think today, was it, or yesterday, or anyway, this week, the Home Secretary said we're going to change the law so that we can deport these people. So that one is starting to be implemented, I think, because of political pressure around this whole thing. Sets of dedicated units in the Crown Prosecution Service to handle these cases. A new Childhood Sexual Exploitation Act with specific offence of organised group-based child sexual exploitation. A statutory duty to publish ethnicity, immigration status, nationality and religion of victims and perpetrators of all these cases. I think that should be all crimes, full stop, to be honest, not just grooming gang crime, all crimes. You should do that. No allowance any child can ever consent to sex abuse, and prosecutions for professionals who excuse child sexual activity as consensual, which we know for a fact that police and social services excused it. Oh, she's consenting, even though she's only 14 or 13 or 12 or 11 or something like that. And that those people should be prosecuted for making that claim. Proven rapists should lose parental rights over children born as a result of rape. That has been a problem for some of these victims. They've had a child, and the father has claimed rights over that child. And mandatory training for frontline professionals on all of this. So there's a lot there. Anybody want to add anything to that, or is that sort of covered really what the government should do, and then we can get on to other things that maybe the church should do and so on?
Well, with the government, I just recently read a report on how we're not even the UK government a report. We're not able to hold ISIS, British ISIS members who raped Yazidi and Christian women into sex, sold them into sex slavery, etc. We don't even hold them accountable. There's still 2,600 Yazidi women and girls missing, and nobody in the world is looking for them. So this again seems to be a larger problem, and because we keep beating around the bush, and we don't want to mention the religious side of things, the problem just increases. And that's the only thing I can add, that if you don't acknowledge what is happening in your own country, or what your countrymen did in other countries such as Syria and Iraq, then how are you going to solve it?
That's a good point.
Can I just say something? Sometimes someone's got to hold these police, these MPs, and these social workers accountable. Why is it none of them have been named and shamed? Why is it they're getting away with this, which will just perpetuate? As if this comes up again, they'll just completely throw it out because they don't want to be held responsible. I think we need to start holding them responsible, so that any police or MP or social worker, knowing if they did not help these girls, they're going to be named and shamed as well. Once that happens, I think we'll start seeing people go public with it much more quickly, because they realize this could ruin their careers.
I think that's a fair point.
About the term Islamophobia and racism, there is such a fear of these two terms. God Logic, I love what he does. He says, yes, I am Islamophobic to the core. And he wears it like a badge. And he just turns the word on its head. And he says, let me tell you what I'm Islamophobic about. I'm absolutely phobic about what they're doing to these girls, women. I'm phobic about what Islam is doing to families and communities. I'm phobic. I'm absolutely scared. Of course I'm Islamophobic. And he just plays with it and throws it right back at the woke.
And that's what we need to get. We need to get that unashamedness of criticizing Islam and being afraid in the right kind of way of what Islam it will try and do and is trying to achieve, and it's doing and is carrying out and so on. But I'll come back to you, Beth, but just on your point, Jay, what Rupert Lowe is saying, he's going to initiate civil proceedings against some of the police and authorities and against perpetrators as well. I think so, because he's frustrated that the government is not doing this and the police
behind closed doors, or is it going to be out in the open?
That will be a civil proceeding. That'll be a proper prosecution, a private prosecution, but it'll be in the court. So whether the government will allow it, like we tried private prosecutions of people who were videoed as having done sex selective abortions, having signed off on, well, you don't want a girl. That's okay, we'll allow that. That's illegal. We tried to bring a private prosecution, and the Crown prosecution took it off us, as they're allowed to do, and then dropped it and said it's not in the public interest. And so this is difficult to get past the authorities on this, because the authorities can do that potentially. But I suggest they'd face so much uproar if one of these proceedings was taken off and dropped. So it'd be very interesting to see whether somebody does manage to bring a private prosecution and whether that really succeeds and happens. In the mix of all this. Beth, go on. I interrupted you.
No, I interrupted you. That was great what you said, Tim. I think one of the things that really shocked me, this is a couple of years ago, but I don't know if much has changed, is when I witnessed a discussion or debate in the House of Lords, and it would be similar if it was in the House of Commons. And first of all, it was a debate on some of these things that we've talked about today, and the abuse of women and the grooming gangs. And there was a couple of peers asking and presenting the case that there's an Islamic connection and so on. I was one of sort of a handful of researchers witnessing the discussion, and there were other peers who were responding, mostly Muslims. And of course, you know, they got up and somewhat lighthearted and sort of just dismissed it as, oh, these things are not Islamic. And I don't know if it went any further from that, but I just thought, first of all, the chamber was quite empty, and second of all, it was one peer and another against mostly Muslim peers, and I just thought, wow, this lack of interest, and when Islamic peers are just dismissing it as not Islamic, rather than dealing with the text, dealing with these connections that we've talked about in these series. I just think that our government and the two houses, you know, the Houses of Parliament and Lords, they have got to start taking these things seriously, because it is just it's country spread.
There's a lot of
so much abuse.
frustration and anger about this in the country. You know, we were speculating in the first episode, when we about the numbers involved. Let's say 100,000. That's 100,000 families, and 100,000. You know, the people, how many people know those girls from school, right?
Yeah.
Or know them as relatives, right? You easily into millions of people who know somebody who was a victim of this. They know somebody. You know, Tommy Robinson, you know, famously says he was kind of radicalized into wherever he is, you know, because one of his cousins was one of these victims, and they thought she was just a whore, but now they recognize she was groomed.
It's interesting that you highlight Tommy Robinson. This is the other thing that happens in media and in government, where if you highlight these issues, as we have done, the modern trend is to categorize you as an extremist or someone who has an agenda or whatever, and then you're categorized, then you're maligned because you put into a category. So you're extreme right, for example, is how you would be categorized. No, it doesn't matter where we stand politically. We are probably from different parties, even just the four of us here, but we are concerned for so many in our countries, and also for Muslim girls themselves. So yeah, that's the other thing, I think, where thinking politically, thinking of the public, narrative in media, we have to be free to express concern without being categorized into an extreme category that then just sidelines us. These are legitimate concerns that we
the level of frustration, like we mentioned earlier on, no single police officer has ever been prosecuted or disciplined for this, as far as we know. And the level of frustration because so many people know somebody, my niece, my cousin, my nephew, whatever it is, my school friend, and so the government, because it was brought into the public again, was it last year, with Elon Musk highlighting it and various other people and so on, and the government, initially voted not to do a national inquiry, whipped by the government, we're not going to do this, and then they had to back down, and they are now going to do their own government inquiry into this. But just to sort of talk about that for a minute, the person who's chairing it, let me just remember her name. She's not a judge. For point one, she's a member of the Labour Party. For point two, it's Baroness Longfield, and she openly supported moving exams for Ramadan, so that's capitulating to Islam when that happened as well. So she's kind of a capitulator in that way. And the initial terms of reference did not mention religion at all. But there was a consultation about that, and we encouraged everyone to respond to say, no, you must take into account religion. So now listen to what the terms of reference says. The objective of the local local investigations is to identify failures in systems and procedures and failures in protecting children from grooming gangs in local areas and make recommendations. And then whether ethnicity, religion, or culture played a role in the response to the grooming gangs, right? Not in the grooming gangs themselves. Like, did we perhaps not tackle this because of the religion or the ethnicity? Well, that is an issue. Let's talk about that. But whether, they then go on to say the extent to which identified failures have led to changes in practice, policy, legislation, and whether those changes have been effective. And then they talk about taking into account, considering the background, including ethnicity, religion, or culture of the perpetrators and victims. That's just considering the background. That's not looking at whether it played a role in the abuse itself. Do you see? So they're still avoiding that in the terms of reference. They don't have to look at whether Islam played a role in this abuse. They can avoid it. They can say, oh, in the responses, yes, people were afraid of being called racist or something, afraid of being called Islamophobic, but they don't have to look, and they probably won't look at whether Islam played a role in the abuse itself.
I think that's also due to the fact that secular society, it can't comprehend that religion can actually be a motivation for people's behavior, because they view everything through socio-economic, that sort of worldview. There's an issue with that.
I think that's one of the very important points.
Hugely important. This is something that we're finding when we talk to an awful lot of our colleagues. Remember at Speaker's Corner, the atheists or the others, they can't understand the importance of Islam. Sam Solomon was so good on this, wasn't he, Tim?
Yeah.
Beth, how he used to say that the world has religions as a small box, and the environment is huge all around it, whereas Islam has the environment as a small, and religion encompasses everything. And it's how you walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep is your religion in Islam, more so than in every other. Christians haven't always been attacked. We've been attacked because we only practice our religion one day a week, and it's about 2 hours on a Sunday morning, and that's about it. How we walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep is very much like the rest of the world. Islam does not do that. And so if you don't know that, if you don't come from that environment, as Sonia is bringing up, you have no idea just how much of an impact Islam has had on the way you look at women. I mean, Beth, how many times have you talked about going into people's homes and how the boys and the girls, the guys are spoiled from a very young age compared to their sisters? They grow up believing that they're superior to girls. They've always grown up with this idea. And if that's there infused from the very beginning, that not only do they look down on women, but at least their women are covered up. You can then understand why they look at the other women and they see them as nothing more than whores, because of the fact that they're not like their Muslim girls. So you can see from a very young age that has an impact on everything they're saying. But I want to bring back something else you brought up that just about 10 minutes ago. Beth, you noticed this. If you look at most of the atrocities that are happening here in the West, there is this critical race theory here in the United States that white people are the ones who are the oppressors and people of color are the ones who are oppressed. Take a look at what we're looking at now. It's just the other way around. It's the colors who are the oppressors, and it's the white who are the oppressed, and no one's picking up on that. Do you see the irony on this? No one's picked up on this idea that really this turns critical race theory on its head. So why haven't people brought this to the fore? Because the people who are the victims here are almost entirely white. They're not brown. They're not black. Very few of them are of color. They're almost entirely white, and yet all the oppressors in this case are of color. And that's something that no one's picked up on either, the whole racial card of this.
So both the religious and the racial side is ignored, apart from the overall term of Asian.
Why is it they haven't groomed Afro-Caribbean girls? Why is it they haven't?
Well, in London, they will have done, and they have, and they certainly have also in the West Indies. We know of cases. Basically, it's the majority culture becomes the victim, where Islam comes in and has grown a community. You would then see the majority culture then becomes the victim, and it doesn't really matter on ethnicity or skin color. In Britain, it would be mostly white girls because we're the majority ethnicity here, and I suppose the indigenous of the island, going back at least thousands of years, and so that's why it's happening here. But in Africa, of course, it is Muslims, both international Muslims. Some are sort of Fulani, but not entirely, and they are abusing fellow Africans. And so there's a racial divide here in the West, but not so much in, say, Africa, for example, or Pakistani men to Pakistani Christian girls. So it's the actual foundational connection through it all is the religion.
Can I ask something of Sonia on?
Add something. If the problem with child abuse, with sexual abuse, is almost always that the victim loses because we're trying to protect the system, and we don't care that much about the individual. And that, with what Jay was just mentioning about, that whole idea of, critical race theory, the whole idea of, white people being oppressors and so on, the current liberal view, if you allow me. And because that system needs to be protected, as we've seen also in the Catholic Church with the abuse, the protection is the system that needs to hold, and at the expense of the individual. And I think that sort of plays into what is happening with the grooming gangs as well, society-wide. Sorry, Jay.
I want to ask you a question. I don't know the answer to this, but we did at Fander, when I was there in London, Beth and Sarah. Remember, Sarah did a whole study on the slavery, Islamic slavery, which was double the size of the West African slavery. The transatlantic slavery had about 11 million slaves. The Islamic slavery had upwards of 20 million. And what was interesting, they didn't need the men. And they castrated many men. Most of the men that they enslaved, they killed. And then those that they remained, they castrated them. And 85% of them, according to the statistics, died of their wounds. And the reason they castrated them was because the slaves they needed were women for the harems. This has not been brought out. So for thousands of years, it has been women who have been enslaved for the sexual pleasure of the men. Could that also not have something to play into what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And
yes.
Sorry.
In Pakistan, for example, a few years ago, Kira Massi, a 19-year-old girl, was going home from work with 3 of her friends, and a car stops with 4 Muslim young men, and they're trying to lure the girls into the car to have sex with them, and the Christian girls refuse. And then they ran over Kiran 3 times until she died. And I quote, saying, "How dare you refuse us? Christian girls are only there for the pleasure of Muslim men." Does that answer your question?
Wow. Okay. And that's modern day.
I think Sonia's said it very clearly, but just to say that the whole Pan-African, East African sexual slave trade that was really expanded by African tribes as well as Islamic Arab tribes coming in, then that went on for 700 years before the transatlantic slave trade, which was much shorter in comparison. But the transatlantic slave trade was empowered by the Pan-African Islamic slave trade. And so we are still feeling the ramifications of that Islamic slave trade even today, which is why, as some of the tensions you've raised, Jay, happening in America, and some of those difficult, complex ethnic tensions and so on, it all goes back before the transatlantic to the actual Pan-African Islamic slave trade. It's all birthed out of that, even down to skin color, the categorizations of people according to skin color. If you look at Islamic medieval scholars, they categorize us not the way the Bible categorizes us, which is very varied and diverse and takes the individual person and looks at them, and that's how you're described according to who you are. Whilst suddenly the Islamic slave trade categorized you either sexually into very narrow categories, right down to skin color, and your value was put on you depending on how light you were or how dark you were, depending on how young you were or how old you were, depending on how ugly or how beautiful you were.
I want to get back to what we should do about this. Jay, what should the church do, Jay, about this?
Yeah.
Well, I think these things that Mark's bringing up, there's something that he hasn't brought up, and that is the responsibility of the church. I think it's only been the church that has ever really done something about this. I mean, I thought it was fascinating that Sonia brought up the thing with the Salvation Army. Thank God for the Salvation Army. Thank God for the Clapham sect in 1800s who stopped slavery. William Wilberforce, the man spent his whole career stopping slavery. It's always been Christianity that has been at the forefront of these atrocities. And the reason why is the Bible. It's right there in the Bible. We know that there's no difference between man and woman, or slave or free, or Jew or Greek. We're all equal in Jesus Christ. It's so clear there in scriptures. We were just talking about slavery. One of the reasons why Wilberforce spent his life stopping slavery is because of the book of Philemon, where Paul sends back a slave who had run away from his master, sends him back to his master, and then redefines the relationship. No longer are you a slave and master, you are now brothers in Christ. We're brothers in Christ. And this is really the only response I can see. It has to come back to the Bible. It has to come back to the person of Jesus Christ. It has to come back to the gospel, which says that we cannot look down on women. Look at 1 Corinthians 7. The entire chapter is about the equality between a man and a woman. And the whole idea of marriage is that our bodies are equal to each other. And that's the beauty of the Christian gospel, that we can bring women back to where they belong. Look at Christ's example, where Mary is there at his feet listening to a rabbi. Martha says to come in the kitchen and says, no, Martha, let Mary stay right here, redefining the whole relationship of a woman learning at a rabbi's feet. 1,000 years of tradition turned on its head. Look at the fact that Jesus, when he wanted to show himself, the greatest event in the history of mankind, the resurrection of Jesus, who did he show himself to? You would think he would have shown himself to the disciples who he'd spent 3 years with, getting ready for this event. No, he showed himself to a woman first. And then the second time he showed himself was to a group of women on the way to Bethany. That's my Jesus. It really comes back to Jesus. It really comes back to the gospel. And the secular world can't understand that. Everything comes back to our worldview. And our worldview is we do not dominate women. We do not traffic women. We do not beat women. And we do not have more than one wife for life. Thank God for the Bible. Thank God for Jesus' example. And thank God he has given us parameters. The word that you use, zina, our zina is very clear. It's the example of Jesus. Thank God the morality you see in his example and the morality that you see in the early church, it must be brought back again. If it was good enough in the first century, it's good enough in the 21st century. If it's good enough for Jesus there in Galilee, it's good enough in Samaria and throughout the whole world. I want to get them back to Jesus, because once you bring them home, we're not going to see these problems.
Yes.
That's why you don't have Christian rape gangs. They don't exist. And that's why, as Beth said, we demand of our pastors, we demand of our youth pastors a higher morality. And when we get it wrong, we're held accountable. And the whole world cries out, look at these terrible Christians who are doing it. The fact that they know that they are terrible is because we're the ones that hold them to a higher standard. And we're the only ones that hold every one of our men and women of God. We hold all of us to a higher standard. Well, that's my solution. I think that's the only solution. It's the best solution I've ever come across, and it's worked for 2,000 years, and it's worked everywhere. Let's continue it. So come on home to Jesus.
Beth, what would you add? And I'll come to you, Sonia. Beth, what would you add that the church should do about this?
Yeah, I ditto that. Basically, the solution, it's not just a solution, but the solution is that a quarter of the world's population, which is Islamic, leaves Islam and turns in and becomes a Christian and turns to Christ. And that we would just not have this issue. Now, are there still going to be sin issues? Yes, until Jesus comes again. But people would be coming out of an ideology that allows them to abuse the vulnerable into an ideology that absolutely condemns it, especially when you do walk the way of Christ. And Christ transforms each and every one. And it's interesting. I have Muslim friends who, when they hear of atrocities happening, and some of my Muslim friends are, they will critique their own faith sometimes, or they'll see things in their own society and call it out. And a lot of them have been living in England for a long time, and oftentimes they will try and make some excuse, and I'll often just point the Islamic connection to them as a talking point, just to say, well, actually in the Quran it says this and this, and then we talk about it. But some of them really believe, and they quote this little saying to me all the time, well, Beth, a leopard can't change their spots. And I often say, well, in Christ a leopard can. And the idea is that yes, you really can. leave the old person behind and become a new creation in Christ. The whole of the Bible teaches that. And this also, of course, is not discussed in the secular world or in secular solutions and so on. But I want to give an example of that. The solution is the gospel. The solution is Christians sharing the gospel, not just politics. Politics can help if it's serving society, but if it's failed, which our country has in this particular area, then the church has to be the solution. It always is the solution, or Christ at the church is the solution. And I had a friend who has left Islam. He's a big TikToker. I won't give you his name because this is just a slight personal story, but he has got huge influence. Many Muslims are becoming Christians through his online ministry. And I gave a talk on women in Islam and some of the stuff that we've talked about here. And at the end, he came up to me, he says, Beth, everything you said was me. All the stuff that we talked about in these episodes, he said, this was me. And he said, it's not just husbands to wives. He says, it was me to my sisters. I owned my sisters. I had control over them. I was allowed to beat them. I was allowed to punish them, but I was also their protector. And he talks about going to Mecca. And in Mecca, him and his family had to protect the girls from the men in Mecca going around the Kaaba on the most holiest of pilgrimages in Islam. And then he talks about family members looking at women there, says, I'm going to go with that woman tonight. And this young man is like, what? He says, we're in Mecca. We're on the Hajj. We're supposed to be being holy before Allah. And he saw all of this and witnessed all of this and saw them kissing the stone. And he's just like, and he leaves Islam. But it was interesting how he was able to testify that he used to be this way, but it's in Christ he has changed. And I will work with him side by side. I trust this young man, and I will work with him side by side for the gospel, because he is being completely renewed and transformed in the name of Jesus. And he loves Jesus and proclaims it. He's the solution. Men like him, women like him, they're the solution.
Sonia,
to Christ.
what would you add, Sonia, about what the church should do?
I think one of the most important thing is that the church needs to recognize that only the Christian church has a theology of vulnerability. There is no other religion that has that. Only the religion, only the belief that God came down and was a small baby, an infant, and was vulnerable. And with that example, that changed me, it changes you, it changes everyone, because that makes us as Christians different. Islam is, as a good friend of mine, Rehmed Ibrahim, mentions, a religion of right by might. The vulnerable are at the mercy is not love, mercy is top down, are at the mercy of the people in power. But Islam itself does not have a theology of vulnerability. That is, I think, the most important thing the church needs to recognize, and it needs to engage with that idea. Because children, not women, the grooming gangs were children. They were vulnerable little children. We're talking 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old little girls. And they need protection. And second, the church needs to go back to the tradition, Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, Justin Martyr's apology, Tertullian, Ambrose, Bishop of Milan in the 3rd, 4th century AD. All of these highly respected theologians, church fathers, have laid down the foundation. They have given us the tools. The Roman Empire was doing similar things, and they dealt with that. And we, again, need to go back to these texts, need to go back to these people who, were close to the time Jesus lived. And we need to read these texts, understand what they were saying. And I just don't understand why Christian churches don't read that sort of texts anymore, or when they do, they don't see how important it is for our time. I just don't get that.
Mm-hmm. I would add to what you've all said, you've all given great, fantastic points. Love it. But I also would add that churches need to talk about it, which is what we're doing today, of course, and need to educate people about it and not be afraid to talk about the Islamic aspect of this and educate people about the Islamic aspect of it, and to recognize people's hurt and frustration and anger about it. That in some cases a righteous anger about the injustice and the abuse that's been going on, and to be churches that recognize that and sympathize with that and understand that and say, yes, you have a righteous anger and it's a righteous anger around it. And what if churches were known as safe havens, where girls knew, if I go to the church, they will help me, they will protect me? What if that became known across this country, that churches, if I can just get to a church, they will help me and they'll save me and they'll protect me and they'll look after me and somebody will adopt me, they'll move me out of this town or something, they'll do something like this. What if we became known for that? Right? That would be the answer. That would be a great answer, wouldn't it? Right? And what if churches were doing, we have a helpline called Safe Haven, and we get calls occasionally from people who are struggling because they've left Islam and facing death threats, whatever, that kind of thing. What about a helpline for victims of grooming gangs? What about churches being known for that and tackling it in a very practical way like that, as well as political advocacy, which is in the tradition of Wilberforce, and others like Jay mentioned as well, political advocacy to say to the government, you must do something about this because it is wrong, it is unjust, it is terrible, and you've got to prosecute people, and we've got to have justice in this country. So all of those things I think we need to be doing, and yeah, hopefully that's been helpful. Listen, thank you so much, all of you. Beth and Jay and Sonia, fantastic expertise you've all got. It's been very clear and evident from all of your comments that you've been saying. Thank you those who've been watching. I hope you found it helpful and interesting. Share it with other people, share it on social media, tell other people to watch it. And I hope I've certainly found it interesting and learned stuff, and I hope you have too. Thank you. That's the end of episode 3.